Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la 'ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahil aliyyil azim. Amma ba'du. Let us begin with Al-Fatihah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Let me welcome all of you to the lecture today, especially our speaker, Professor Osman Bakar. He is going to talk about very, very important subject today. I think the topic that he's going to talk about today is one of the most important subject because it has been, the discussion about Islamization has been going on. And many institutions were established and the idea were shared worldwide, especially in the Islamic world. And the institutions were created, were established, and the students were produced based on these particular ideas. So what's going on right now? I mean, after more than 20 years, I would say the Islamization, what happened, that what you have done in the past and what is going to be in future. Before we listen to the lecture, I would like to share with you one book that I come across with before. I think it was published in 2014, written by Shadi Hamid. He is a senior fellow at Brookings Institute in Washington. He wrote Islamic Exceptionalism, How the Struggle Over Islam is Reshaping the World. In this book, his idea is very simple. He said that you cannot change Islam, and Islam is very exceptional in terms of the teaching, the law, and the people. You cannot change that. And even though there are attempts to change that, there would be a resistance. So that's why he said in this book, secularization Muslims are resistant to secularization. I think it is not only that. I believe that part of the effort is because of the Islamic revivalism, in which Islamization is one of the key factors. However, as I said earlier, even though we have this Islamization with us for so many years, with the institution, with the scholars that has been produced, and the student, I would say I am the product of Islamization. And I believe that the genetic that I have, the Islamization genetic that I have in myself, is very useful in facing the intellectual onslaught, Ghazwa al-Fikri, in the modern world today. But I would like to learn more about what are the legacy and what we can do with Islamization. So today, we are honored to have Professor Osman Bakar, who has been with the Islamization project for so many years. So now I would like to introduce him. I think that, of course, he did not need to be introduced, but let me introduce him briefly, okay, for those people who may wanted to know more about Professor Osman Bakar. He received a doctorate in Islamic philosophy at the Temple University in Philadelphia in the United States, currently holder of Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal at Istac-Iium. He also Emeritus Professor in Philosophy of Science at University of Malaya. He was formerly Distinguished Professor and Director of Sultan Umar Ali Sharifuddin Center for Islamic Studies, University of Brunei Darussalam, and a former Malaysia Chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at the Prince Talal Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, George Washington University, at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and Research at the University of Malaya. Prof. Osman is also author and editor for 40 books and more than 300 articles on various aspects of Islamic thought and civilization, particularly Islamic science and philosophy, in which is leading authority. His well-known book, which are the Classification of Knowledge in Islam, 1992, and Tawhid and Sign, and the latest book, Al-Farabi, Life, Work and Significance, and also the colonialism in the Malay archipelago, the civilizational encounters. He has been named among the 500 most influential Muslim in the world since 2009, and he received his doctorate in 1984 by Sultan of Pahang in 2000. With a great honor and privilege, I would like to invite Prof. Osman to start the lecture, please.
Thank you very much, Brother Dr. Ahmad Al-Muhammadi. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning. So the moderator, Professor Abdulaziz Bergud, the Dean of Istac-Iium, the professors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank Istac for inviting me to start off as the first lecture for another series. Alhamdulillah, Istac has several series of lectures, and this is another one, which is on the Islamization of knowledge. Actually, I was approached by Professor Dr. Imtiyaz, the new coordinator of the program Islamization of knowledge at Istac. And the topic was given to me by him. I haven't changed any word in the title, but I thought it was a good one. So, and I have prepared some presentations and slides for presentation today. So you see there the topic of the lecture, as publicized, also reflections on the legacy and future of Islamization of knowledge. So basically there are two parts. One is legacy and the other is the future. And of course it's good that he put those reflections because that will give me, in a sense, some freedom also, as I see it, in one way, the Islamization of knowledge. How I see it now, of course, after having associated with the agenda for a very, very long time. Now, let me start with some kind of introductory remarks to set the background of the Islamization of knowledge movement. I would like to refer to this as Iohk Iohk movement. Just a brief history, because perhaps for many people, maybe especially the younger generation, they were not aware of the origin of that. And anyway, let me emphasize here that I see Islamization of knowledge movement as an integral component of the ummatic movement. I like to emphasize the word ummatic because Islamization of knowledge was inspired from within the ummah for the sake of the ummah, without excluding the possibility of its benefits to the humanity as a whole. But in essence, it was inspired by the ummah, and for the objectives of the ummah, and in that sense, I call it ummatic movement. And another thing about this ummatic thing, which means that I would like to discuss my topic today from the ummatic perspective. To speak from the Ummati perspective, which means then I would like to situate the discussion within Islamic history, with the history of the Ummah, in a sense, in a way, which means that it is within the perspective of the Islamic religious history, Islamic calendar, which is the Hijriah calendar. Now, we all know very well that there's hadith, there's a popular hadith that at the turn of every Islamic century, the Hijrah century, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise Mujahid, a group of Mujahid, of renewals of the region at the turn of every Hijriah century. And of course, this is very interesting, very interesting phenomena, historical phenomena, or rather civilizational phenomena concerning the Muslims. And I would like to approach the topic today from this perspective in order to situate the origin of the Islamization of knowledge movement by referring to this hadith at the turn of every century. I have been interested actually to know more about the interface, or rather the transition from the last decade of the 14th century Hijrah and the first decade of the 15th century Hijrah. Is there any some kind of connection, the kind of continuity and change between these two decades, between two neighboring decades? I repeat, the last decade of the 14th century and the first decade of the 15th century. That's how I try to relate here. So when I reflect, now we go to reflection. When I reflect on the events that led to the event I'm going to talk about later, the First World Conference, the First World Conference on Muslim Education in Mecca in 1977. In 1977, it was still in the last decade of the 14th century. Not yet, because the first Muharram of the 15th century was in December 1979. In the sense that the Iranian Islamic Revolution is closer to that. So I just want to refer to what happened on the eve of the 15th century, because what happened in that decade sets the background, sets in a sense, provided the issues that were to shape the 15th century. Now, let me just go through these events without really going into explanation because of the time factor. Otherwise, it's a very interesting thing. For people in my generation, we knew very well what happened, but there are many people who are listening now from the younger generation who are not yet born in this world. All right. Now, first of all, interestingly, in Kuala Lumpur, the 13th May 1969, ethnic riots that not only of ethnic implication, but also religious implication, precisely because the Malays also happen to be also Muslims as far as Malaysia is concerned. So just remember that. All right. I mentioned that because now 1969 to 1979 was the last decade of the 14th century Hijrah. Now the impact of the 13th May 1969 is still felt today, the impact. So it was no ordinary event. And over the years, since that tragedy that event, religious factor, in other words, religion entered more and more into the into the picture. Now, in September 1969, in Rabat, 22nd to 20th September 1969, the first Islamic Summit Conference. That conference was convened by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, but it was in Rabat, and that was following the burning of the Al-Aqsa mosque, more precisely part of the pulpit, the Salahuddin pulpit at the Aqsa mosque, and the person who said the accent was an extremist Australian Christian, who was later declared to be insane and then just forgotten. It's very interesting that an insane person will know what's the best place or the most important place in the mosque to be burned. Now, Tripoli, the same year, September 1969, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi rose to power. It has impact, there is no doubt, especially among the young at that time, especially the early Gaddafi, when he was also associated with Islam, not simply the Third International Theory. Yeah. And then Riyadh in 1973, the Arab 1973 Arab oil embargo, very, very important, following the October 1973 Arab-Israeli war. Again, Riyadh in 1979, first international conference on science and technology in the Muslim world. I was invited to attend that conference through my organization, Muslim Youth Movement of Malaysia. At the time, I was a lecturer at the National University of Malaysia. So I was really looking forward to attend that because it was the first international conference I ever presented a paper on the subject of the why Muslims lag behind in science and technology. But just to refresh our memory, what happened? This was in 1974. I think it was planned to be held on March 1975. I was traveling with brother engineer Talib from Brunei, and we had a stopover in Bombay. But in Bombay, we heard the bad news that King Faisal was assassinated. So we contacted Riyadh, said that we are on the way. And they said, never mind, proceed to Riyadh because you're already there, which I did. But the conference was attended later a few months later, towards the end of 1975, which I attended. And then in London, spring 1976, the World of Islam Festival was held, and my former teacher, Professor Syed Hussein Nasser, played a very important role in organizing that World of Islam Festival. Two main exhibitions were held, namely the Arts of Islam and Science and Technology in Islam. And then in Mecca, 31st of March to April 1977, the first World Conference on Muslim Education. And I did not attend that, but I'm happy to note that I was in a way associated also with that through my teacher, Professor Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas, because he was supposed to present a keynote paper, keynote paper entitled the preliminary remarks on the nature of knowledge and the definition and aims of education, which was later published as a chapter in his well-known book, Islam and Secularism. You know, I remember that very well. Before he presented that, he invited me for an intellectual meal because he presented his draft paper and invited and asked for some responses from me. I was very happy to at least to contribute on the point regarding science and technology. And then in Kuala Lumpur, 1977, soon after the Mecca conference, I was involved in setting up the Islamic Academy of Science in Malaysia. So we are one of the first, we were among the first, to feel the impact of that Mecca conference. Then, of course, on 1st April 1979 in Tehran, Iran voted by national referendum to become an Islamic republic. So just imagine that these are the events. These are the events that took place in the last decade of the 14th century. Looking at it, if you don't know what happened later, we saw these events as isolated events, But now, today, as I look back, all right, I could see this kind of interconnected, as if somebody planned that way. Of course, that somebody is not Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Yeah. So I hope I'll be able to perhaps to come up with a reflection in the form of writing on this topic. So, but what I'm saying is that to be in short, all these events later have influences on the events on the following decade, the first decade of the 15th century, especially on the revival, the Islamic revival in the whole world. Now, so this basically this is the brief, not so brief introduction on the eve of the 15th century Hijrah, the shaping factors, something about the First World Conference on Muslim Education in Mecca. Now, to me, the First World Conference on Muslim Education in Mecca is the most important intellectual gathering, intellectual event to have taken place in the Islamic world in the post-colonial era. If you look back, nothing kind of intellectual event of that size, of that importance and scope and significance. That conference was a kind of intellectual earthquake that sent waves to the whole of the Islamic world, and certainly what we call the Islamization of a knowledge movement, in a sense, was initiated by that important gathering, especially the paper written by Professor Naqib Al-Attas. So and of course the Iranian Revolution also is another earthquake. It is political, but impact on the world was also profound, and especially in the area of political science, the area of political thought. It opened up new debates about what Islam is all about as far as politics is concerned. So if you want to talk about the origin of the Islamization of political science in modern times, then the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 cannot be brushed aside. Let me go to the next. I'm sorry, I have a problem here. Yes, okay. Now talk about the legacy. Well, I divided the legacy of Islamization of knowledge movement into three. First, the institutional legacy. The second, literary legacy. And three, the philosophical and epistemological legacy. So the taking the Mecca conference as a kind of the origin and the inspiring factor, the factor that inspired the movement that was to take place in the Islamic world, in various parts of the Islamic world. I can divide this into three now. I mean, looking at what happened in the last 40 years or so, then these are the things. So let me first start with the institutional legacy. Yes, if you reflect back now on what kind of institutions have been created through the last several decades, and these institutions played a very important role, very important role in various ways. First of all, let me start with the triple IT. Now, there have been debates about, I mean, who started in a sense, the concept of Islamization of knowledge. Let me emphasize this. Of course, as far as for me personally, I first heard the word Islamization of knowledge around 1975 or 76 from Professor Syed Muhammad Nakil Atal, because I was personally associated with him for 8 years, from 1974 until 1981. For 8 years, I was very close to him. I consider very close teacher-student relationship. So I had a chance to know more, in a sense, from near his ideas about Islamization of knowledge. So of course, in saying that, I'm saying that I don't mean. In saying that, I don't mean that the idea, the meaning of Islamization was not known before him. I'm just talking about the terminology, because the idea of Islamization of knowledge, the substance of that idea, has already been part of the Islamic history. After all, I would say, the first great Islamization of knowledge happened in the 8th century. In the third century, or the 2nd century of Hijrah, and this 8th century of the Common Era. Now, and what was that movement all about? It was the movement that wanted to integrate knowledge, to acquire knowledge, integrate knowledge from different sources, from non-Islamic sources, from other civilizations, and integrate that into the Islamic epistemological perspective. That's what happened. That's what the Muslim scholars who inherited knowledge from the Greeks, from the Persians, from the Indians, from the Chinese, from the Egyptians. These were the ancient civilization, the previous civilization, whose knowledge was encountered by Muslims, and they did their part. All right. Of course, they don't use the word Islamization. They didn't use the word Islamization of knowledge. But what it was about, the substance of it, all right, then there was already a precedent in Islamic history. So now in modern times, in the post-colonial era, we have to deal with very, very important source of knowledge to Muslims, which is the modern Western civilization. So in that sense, Al-Atas was not the first person, but as far as the term Islamization of knowledge, I think he was the first to use it. And after that, I know also, because I was associated also with Professor Ismail Faruqi al-Marhum, the word Islamization itself, Professor Atas had used much earlier. I think around 1969, he used term, or 63 even, he used the term Islamization of Malay Archipelago. But the word Islamization of Malay Archipelago was not coined by him. It was coined by another by a Dutch scholar. I can remember his name now. I think Dr. Hastings. He was another person, a scholar of Malay Archipelago. So so I think this I want to say that, and but as far as organization is concerned, Triple IT was earlier than Professor Al-Atas in setting up an organization. Triple IT was co-founded in 1981. In 1981, I remember in 1982, I was at Temple just a few months after coming to Temple. I was invited by Professor Faruqi to look at his draft on the work plan, the Islamization work plan, before it was published. I did, and he asked me whether I have any comments. He asked me because he knew of my association with Professor Al-Atas. I went to Temple in 1981, at the end of 1981, and this was in 1982. The master plan draft was shown to me. So anyway, Triple IT, I see Triple IT as the first institution the first institution which was aimed, whose objectives is wholly devoted to Islamization of knowledge. Then we have the Istac. Istac was much later, which was in 1987, sometime in 87, after Iium was established. So in that sense, Iium was the earlier institution, that has the stars of moving or as a mover in the Islamization of knowledge. So it's because Iium was established in 1983. Istac only 4 years later joined Iium as a part of the university, although as an autonomous part of the university. Now so Istac is a very important legacy. Of course, it is still exists today, and I'm associated with it. In fact, this program is organized by Istac. Right? So Istac's contribution to Islamization of knowledge is very important, and together with the rest of the Iium, I think it features very importantly in the history of Islamization of knowledge. Then we have also the other institutions like the OIC-sponsored Islamic universities. I think there are 6 of them. All these are, you say, what is the connection between OIC and Islamization of knowledge? Well, OIC was set up in Rabat, as mentioned in earlier, all right, following the burning of the Aqsa Mosque. So if we ask what's the connection, now when I reflect back, I can see that connection between the OIC. So the OIC was later to play a role in Islamization of knowledge, and including setting up Islamic universities that are going to play that role. And of course, Iium was considered as the first university, as the first Islamic university. Then we had the one in Islamabad, the International Islamic University in Islamabad, although that university existed under a different name years earlier, but as an OIC-sponsored university was in 1985. Then the Islamic Academy of Science in Malaysia, in which I was involved in the setting up. I set up that because we wanted to contribute to the Islamization of natural sciences. And that was set up in 1977. Still exists today, although, well, I'll comment on it later. All right. And then you have the Islamic Academy Cambridge, set up by Professor Said Ali Ashraf, which plays a very important role, based in the UK, and of course, his best known project was the quarterly journal, the Muslim Education Quarterly. And then you have the Ijmalis. Ijmalis existed only for a short while, founded by Zawdin Sardar, but during the time it existed, intellectually it played a very important role, both as a proponent and as a critique of ideas of Islamization. And then you have got the ISMI, the Indonesian Association of Muslim Intellectuals. these are the major institutions that I would say, well, if people ask institutional-wise, what has Islamization of knowledge movement has bequeathed to us, has left us? These are the important ones. Okay, now the next legacy is literary legacy. Just to take the important ones, certainly the writings of Al-Faruqi and other triple IT scholars like Hamid Abu Sulaiman and others, and of course not to mention very, very important role, certainly in the Arabic language, Dr. Tahar Jabir in Washington. All right. Now, then of course the writings of Professor Al-Atas, and hence of course among his students at Istac, and now who continued his in his legacy into another institution, and then the writings of Said Nasser, more kind of a one-man institution, but his writings, his numerous writings play a very important role, and the writings of Said Ali Ashraf and Ziauddin Sardar, because both were based in London, and the publications of the World Conference on Muslim Education series itself. In other words, the World Conference in Mecca generated a lot of publication. The most important were the first 6 or 7 publications, including the aims of education, edited by Professor Al-Atas, then the book, the Natural and Social Science, edited by Professor Faruqi and Abdullah Nasif Omar Nasif, and of course the book edited by Dr. Said Ashraf on the literature, and then of course my own humble publications, which many of you know about. So these are the as far as the literary legacy is concerned. I think for the younger generation, they should study about this writing, because what is contained in these writings is not out of date. All right. See, I think it is a waste. It is a waste of energy, a waste of talent, when these people produce this writing, because it's meant to be the intellectual kind of guide for the future generations of the Ummah. And then the third legacy, which is very, very important, because in a sense, these are the legacies in terms of ideas. So first of all, the legacy in terms of the philosophy of Iohk. Now, I think we may even say it's philosophies, in a sense, because there are many philosophies. Each school of thought associated with the scholars I've mentioned earlier, in a sense, although they are united in the fundamentals of the Iohk, but there is also a kind of different schools of thought, different schools of understanding of what Iohk stands for. And I mentioned particularly here the ideas of rationale. What is the rationale of the philosophy of Iohk? Why was Iohk, Islamization of knowledge, necessary? Why was it necessary for that time? And later we'll see whether it is so for in the future. So rationalization of Islamization constituted a very important proportion of the literature on the subject. Now, in other words, the question of I think when there was an attempt by some people to criticize Islamization based on the argument that today we live in the one world concentrating on the common humanity and not to divide people, something like that. not to talk about Islamization, which has been accused of being of a kind of sectarianism. I don't think that is the proper way, certainly that is a wrong response to Islamization of knowledge. But anyway, what I'm saying is that the rationale is available. I think the rationale was sound. I think the most important reason is that it is an ummatic agenda dealing with problems, current problems faced by the Ummah, especially in the field of knowledge and education. And it is important that it is, in a sense, for the sake of the future of the Ummah, the objectives are made clear, and then the scope is also made clear. So this is the first category of intellectual legacy or the philosophical legacy that I mean. So and then the concepts, theories, and methods of Iohk, in a sense, explains further the objectives, the scope. So the concepts of Islamization, there are several theories, and there are different ways and approaches of realizing that. And of course, these are issues that are subject to change, subject to criticism, all right? But the point is that is a second category of a legacy that is intellectual legacy that is important to be taken into account. Then, of course, the question of applications, all right? So the first batch of scholars were, in a sense, conceptualizing about Islamization of knowledge. But what's more important now, what's the follow-up, that's very, very important, is the question of for what purpose? And applications to education, top, in a sense, the most important. What's the purpose of this? Is because we want to see that the present generation of the young students will understand what's the nature of the challenge that we are facing, in a sense that how to make sure that the challenges posed by secularization especially will be able to be countered by us, by the Muslim. So we can say the applications of Iohk, of course, not only to the field of education, but also to other areas of knowledge in the sciences, of course. In a sense, question of its application to the natural sciences and then to the social sciences. There was attempt also. There's many attempts to see how to apply the theory of Islamization of knowledge to the field of social science and even the arts, right? Even the art. I remember very well, years ago, even in Malaysia, we have many artists, we have many different figures who are interested also in Islamization, how they could apply to their own field of knowledge. Then the Islamization of knowledge and issues of universality. In other words, yes, there was a challenge posed by Muslims themselves, but who are opposed to the idea of Islamization on various grounds. One of the grounds was that the question of universality. Now, is Islamization of knowledge a universal idea, or is this a particular idea? It is a sectarian idea. I myself have been asked questions about this. I tried to answer by saying that it depends on how we define Islam, because Islam has two dimensions. One, universal dimension. The other one is particular dimension that is totally meant for the Ummah. But Islam being a universal religion, the greater part of the teachings of Islam concern universal ideas, right? Concern the issues of universality. In other words, although the term used is Islam or Islamic, all right, but the ideas themselves are actually universal, because the application, is universal. As I said earlier, yes, if we don't exclude the possibility that humanity as a whole will benefit from that, but our focus is on the Muslim Ummah. So actually, Islamization of knowledge as an event in the Islamic world was also followed by a good number of non-Muslim academics and scholars. Many, in fact, have written also on that. So when I was at Georgetown in Washington, in DC, when I was teaching at Georgetown, there was an interest from academics, from students about this Islamization of knowledge. So when in fact, there was one of the courses I taught. Islamization of knowledge was one of the courses I taught at university, at Georgetown, a Catholic university, because they see some parallels in terms of issues between what happens in Islam and also in Christianity. All right? So, but the idea that we should abandon Islamization of knowledge because it sounds sectarian, because it is Islamic and therefore only pertaining to the Muslim, that is not true. Of course, we admit that when we want to apply principles of Islamization of knowledge to specific problems pertaining to the Ummah, like, for example, to Islamic, to the Sharia, part of the Sharia that pertains to the interests of the Muslims only. Yes, we accept that, but we can accept two different dimensions, right? I think for the most part, we understand Islamization to mean both the universal and the particular. Before I go further, I think I just want to mention, I remember in Malaysia, right? In Malaysia, because non-Muslims in Malaysia were also concerned about the issue of Islamization of knowledge. So I think there was one program of the government in which Tun Mahathir talked about Islamization, and in the audience there were some non-Muslims, who asked, well, seem all right. I mean, if Islamization of knowledge is to be made a kind of a national policy that is to be kind of imposed on the non-Muslim as well, I mean, it's not. They complain about this. In other words, the kind of imposition of Islam. So please, I remember I was not happy with the answer given, precisely because certainly it gave the impression that Muslims are imposing this Islamization of knowledge, I mean, which are opposed to their points of view, which are drawn to their own philosophy. Whereas I think what should have been done was to emphasize the universality of the issues that Muslims were concerned in Islamization of knowledge. So our contribution to humanity is there, but what is wrong with Muslims raising up issues that are of universal interest and then in the sense of benefit to the whole of mankind? So the issue raised then therefore is about the universality of Islamization of knowledge, which we'll look later, inshallah. Now, so when you look at the legacy, then what are the outstanding issues today as we look back, all right? And also to look at the legacy that is with us. So what are the outstanding issues that we are facing? First, I think we have to accept that there are setbacks to the Iohk movement. Setbacks, especially at the level of leadership. Yes, I think one of the things that we feel that is something that affects us all is regarding the setbacks at the level of leadership. Just to give examples, just to say, no, try to see what kind of setback that we had. In 1986, so 1986, you are talking about still in the first decade, all right? In the first decade of the 15th century, when we were still in the formative period, when Iohk was still in the formative period, in 1986, Al-Faruqi was assassinated. Al-Faruqi was assassinated in 1986. At the time, I was still at Temple University. Now, he was a very important leader, one of the foremost leaders in the Islamization of knowledge movement. Right? And then the 1988. In 1998, that is in the second decade. Professor Syed Ali Ashraf passed away. Professor Syed Ashraf was the prime mover of the Makkah conference. He played the role of secretary to that very important event. And later he set up Islamic Academy in Cambridge. He was responsible for the publication series of that of the Makkah conference. There's no doubt that he was one of the most important figures in the Islamization of knowledge movement. So to miss him in 1998, the movement suffered a blow. And then in 1998, the same year as Syed Ashraf passing away, that Anwar Ibrahim was sacked by Mahathir. Now, Anwar played a very important role. He was not academic in a sense, but he played a very important role in the Islamization of knowledge movement, both in terms of the support given to the International Islamic University, to Istac, all right? Not only that, he was also part of the triple IT. So lost another important person from the movement. So that was in the 1990s and the 1990s. Now, it's not only that. Even more important setback. All right, 2001, the September 11, 2001. So what was the impact of the September 11, 2001 on Islamization of knowledge movement? You know very well that triple IT was based in America, was based in United States. Triple IT was that. Now, following in 2002, following the September 11 thing, there was a kind of anti-Arab movement, anti-Islam movement, the Islamophobia in the United States. So there was an American surveillance on triple IT. So leading this surveillance was of FBI. So FBI wanted to associate triple IT with the terrorism, with the extremism. And that forced triple IT to move, in a sense, away from America including to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia. And then in the same year, 2002, Al-Atas lost Istac. I just appealing to you to see, if you are asking what happened, why there was a decline. Well, the loss of leadership is certainly a very important factor, especially from the perspective of Islam. Right? So because there was a setback in terms of the loss of leadership, the movement as a whole suffered. The other one is the loss of intellectual momentum. Yes, the loss of intellectual momentum. it's kind of no new ideas. Right? As we see now, yeah, no new ideas. There was, yes, because the triple IT said they were in the sense of reviewing their whole role, their contribution to the Iohk movement. What happened is that, yes, for example, in terms of concept of Islamization itself was changed to the concept of integration, all right? Integration, because that's the main reasons, and I don't think the issue is resolved. Yet. But the point is the change from Islamization to integration. It's not a subtle issue. But the point is, from the viewpoint of concepts, from the viewpoint of philosophy, from the viewpoint of ideas, right? There was a loss of intellectual momentum, and as far as Istac-Iium is concerned, of course, we have the Professor Tan Sri Mahkamah Hasan trying his best, to save the situation, to maintain the momentum. But there's only one among few. But looking at the movement as a whole, there was a decline, and at some point, is a kind of the movement has been shelved, and no new ideas coming to renew the movement, and of course the lack of intellectual sustainability, right? Is the Islamization of knowledge movement sustainable or not? That is a question. I see there's a lack of intellectual sustainability when I look at the moving ideas, the ideas that can move us forward as far as Islamization. It's not there. What is there is just we continue to do the same, to do more of the same, but not something really new, to uplift, to give a new momentum to the movement, and that is clear. That is clearly so if we look at the work on actual Islamization in the different fields, in economics, in psychology, in social science, in anthropology, and so on. Very, very slow. Yeah, it was a slow thing. And of course, the unfulfilled objectives. In other words, that objective was never really achieved, even at any time during the 40 years or so. In other words, we fulfilled a good number of objectives, but there are others which are not. And I want to mention here the most important objective of Islamization of knowledge that was not really realized. And if you want to continue this movement, then we should really need to address this objective. What is this objective? What is this unfulfilled objective? To come up with a new, in other words, to create new disciplines, new sciences, or to reform, yeah, those sciences so that they conform to the epistemology of Islam, the epistemology. I've always emphasized this point. I said, generally speaking, even from the universal point of view, what we call science, what we call academic discipline, comprises 4 components. There are 4 integrated components in a science that is acceptable to Islamic epistemology. First is subject matter of that discipline, the subject matter. Is it well defined or not? Has it, the question is whether the subject matter has been well defined. Of course, even in Islamic, in classical Islam, all right, when it comes to subject matter, it is changing. It can change depending on the progress of that discipline. But the point is, each discipline has a subject matter that's well defined. So if we want to study, say, if psychology is the study of the human soul, is the idea of soul well defined or not? So even in modern disciplines, now we talk about let's say the various branches now of economics and business and so on. Have we really looked at the subject matter? Number two is the assumptions. Number two is the assumptions of that discipline. Because every discipline has to be based on certain assumptions which we accept as true, but which we cannot really prove. And without those assumptions, we cannot move forward, we cannot proceed. So those assumptions have to be accepted, and we proceed. That's what happened. Really, what happened to Newtonian mechanics, for example, Newtonian mechanics, what we call the Newtonian physics, all right? Newtonian physics is based upon assumptions about the universe, assumptions about motion, about time. There are so many things that have to be accepted as true, and precisely because of that, they're able to proceed with the subject. So different disciplines have different assumptions. Now, in Islamic tradition, those assumptions are usually provided and approved in another discipline, let's say in metaphysics, in cosmology, and so on. So in other words, our confidence, our attachment to the foundational assumption is there precisely because revelation is able to help us to say that, well, this must be true because it's mentioned in Revelation. But here, we have to examine. Let's say, for example, science now. Yeah? I'm talking about physical science, about natural science. What are some of the assumptions? Well, one of the most important assumptions they have now is that the physical world, what exists is only the material world. There's nothing but material existence. That is the assumption of modern physical science. All right. Yes, there is a challenge from outside, from outside the discipline said no. The world is not that. The universe is not that thing, but it is a living thing. It is a living organism. Yeah? It is alive. The universe is alive. It is not that. So the assumption that the world is alive, that is contradictory, yeah, to the what is being held, what's being accepted now. All right. I remember I was attending this the Hokkaido 7-member discussion group in Japan sometime in 2000 and I think 2007. We attended with some other, just 7-member in the group. Our job there was to re-examine the foundational assumptions of modern science. And we agreed then, right, after examining them, actually find that 1/3 of the current assumption no longer acceptable because no longer in conformity with frontiers, not with frontier knowledge, and also it is against the accepted knowledge in so many traditions, in many religions. Now, 1/3 of the assumptions can be retained, and another third needs to be reformulated. So, but Islamization of knowledge that we have right now, I mean, I don't think it goes into that. we really don't examine the foundational assumptions in psychology, in economic sciences, even in the religious sciences. And to me, that is an objective that's not yet enforced. Now, next, the third element, of course, is the methodology. The methodology. Each discipline has its own methods. Of course, Islamic epistemology affirms that, all right? But what we have is a kind of uniformity. So modern thought wants to impose a kind of uniform thought on methodology. There is only one type of method. That is the empirical method. Empirical method is the only way to gain knowledge. All other methods are not accepted. But that goes against the epistemology of Islam, because Islamic epistemology affirms that there are many ways of arriving at knowledge. The nature of each subject matter will determine what kind of methods will be appropriate for that. So this is another issue. And although I admit in this area, there has been some thinking from Muslim or discussion, all right? Let us really have our own methods of studying things. But the other one is objective, yeah, the objective. What is the objective of each discipline? Yeah. I mean the methods that are immediate to us. I'm not talking about whether that kind of knowledge is going to be applicable to whether it be useful to society or not. Yeah. Let's say, for example, we are students at the Iohk. They'll say about some students write a thesis, then ask the thesis whether the thesis has any applicability to the policy, the university's policy on Islamization or knowledge. I think that one is a distant objective, not the objective that is our immediate concern to that particular discipline, which is particularly to establish principles, the truth in that domain of inquiry. That is the most immediate objective. So my point is, this is a very, very important issue, all right? Whether you want to call it integration or Islamization, whatever, we cannot run away from this, because until we create that kind of science and that understanding of scientific discipline, then we have not yet achieved the objective of Islamization of knowledge. Okay, let me guess the last slide here now. Yes, the future. Continuity and change. My own belief is that there should be continuity in the Iohk movement. We should have the commitment to that. But to say that means that the rationale of the Iohk movement still stays. It stays. If we think that today, 40 years after the initial Islamization of knowledge, now we are in a new situation, you know, it's no longer applicable. What we used to accept as a rationale of IOC is not acceptable now. That's a different question. Then, I mean, which means that might as well do away with the Islamization of knowledge movement. But for me, I think that the Iohk concept, the Islamization of knowledge, should continue. Why? Because the reasons for the Iohk that were accepted 40 years ago still stays. Secularism has not gone away. Marginalization of religion in the academia has not gone away. The need to respond to the many ideas, concepts, theories in the current academia to Islamic ideas to Islamic perspectives is still there. In fact, in some areas, it's going worse. It's getting worse. So the reasons for the Iohk have not disappeared. And since they have not disappeared, Iohk is still needed. So I think in substance, so there should be continuity in certain things there. I'm not saying that continuity in everything, because also things to criticize. Yeah, but we should look. But philosophically, I think there should be continuity in the Islamization of knowledge. The question of whether to call it is, I mean, this is integration, for example. I made my point that I think Professor Kamal Hassan, also my colleague, also emphasized it. Actually, the Islamization and integration cannot be separated. Can be separated. In fact, yeah, from my own perspective, which I call the Tawhidic perspective, right? Integration has no meaning unless it is integrated into a conceptual framework that is very clear, or no, that's clear to us, not very, very vague. So the idea of integration means that the ideas to be integrated into something. Yeah? If you into something broader, you cannot integrate without knowing what that thing. Now, so therefore, we need to introduce or need to emphasize this concept of the Tawhid framework, the Tawhidic perspective. Yeah? To integrate knowledge from other sources, from other cultures, from civilization into the Islamic one means to integrate into that Tawhidic thing. Now, on top of that, I think looking to the future, we need to have a new kind of leadership. New kind of leadership. Now, my saying here, there should be, I'm suggesting a shift from state to civil society role. In the past, there's been a kind of two dependence. We depended, the academics, scholars, depend on the state. Yeah? So the moment the changes in the state happen, then we face trouble. That happens in the universities. That happens everywhere, all right? For political reasons, there's a change of leadership, then there's no continuity. There is no continuity. I think to depend on political power, on state power for this is quite risky. So I think, especially for academics and scholars who play civil society role, they should take over the leadership. The other one, of course, maybe we need to redefine the concept of Islamization of knowledge and its objectives. I think that's in a general kind of way. Yes, I mean, it is valid. I mean, to say that knowledge has grown now to such an extent that there are new areas that need to be sorted out. All right, and then to define the role of Muslim intellectuals and their scholarship. In other words, if you want to maintain the Iohk movement, then the role of Muslim intellectuals as in identifying the new challenges, right? The changing challenges. Maybe the nature of the challenge has not really changed, but the forms, the shapes, all those challenges have changed, and some people may miss the point just because the manifestations of the challenges have changed. They regard it as entirely new, whereas the nature of the challenges has not really changed. The nature of secularism, for example, but the manifestations of secularism can take new forms. So if Muslim intellectuals are not alert to this kind of changes, then we will not be able to address the problems that we are facing. So, only 2 days ago, I was taking part in the webinar in the launching of the book by Professor Yasir Auda. I think the title of his book, Re-Envisioning Islamic Scholarship, for example, is that kind of thing. In other words, he was proposing that that we should have a relook at our understanding of revelation, because by looking at this revelation as a whole, the broader perspective, then we'll see things in their proper place. In other words, the message is get away from the idea of specialization that is ignorant of the broader view, the broader picture of things. So the balanced kind of specialization. We know, yes, we can go into more specialized things, but we don't lose sight of the broader intellectual picture or epistemological picture. So what are the prospects and challenges? I think it depends. It depends. First of all, it depends on the state of the Ummah, on the Ummati, the present Ummati condition, the prospect. Because the prospects of success will depend on the quality of the Ummah. If the quality of the Ummah is deteriorating, then it's very difficult to sustain this movement. And the challenges are many. Most important, of course, is the challenge at the level of technology. Technology has changed, has a great impact on the life of the Ummah, including the impact on our own mindset. The Muslim mindset is being being impacted by the technology, especially in information technology. You can see, and even now, in the sense that the COVID, the question, so the COVID coronavirus has brought about new situation entirely. And how should we respond to this? Yeah? So if our mind is only concerned with concerned with vaccination, nothing else, then we are not prepared. We are not prepared really for the future. I've written something on this in my latest article on the coronavirus and the integral ecology, where I urge that we need to look beyond vaccination to look at the root causes of coronavirus, COVID. In other words, there's a larger picture. The larger picture that today humanity, some parts of humanity, especially the wealthy countries, they want to encroach on the kingdom of viruses, all right, for worldly gains, all right, worldly gains, to make biological weapons and of course the pharmaceutical companies to benefit from the. We are living in that kind of world, yeah. So these are new things, new challenges, all right, for the people, the upholders of Islamization of knowledge movement. So I think I just let's see that full of uncertainties. Yeah? But the point is that those who are still with the Iohk movement, those still with the institution, those who are still with the institutions of the Iohk that survive, let us do something. Let us do something to refresh, to broaden our vision, and to be more dynamic and proactive, inshallah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Prof. Osman. I would say it is very insightful and very special. And we have actually a lot of questions here in the chat box and also in YouTube. So I would like to straight away go into the question that I take from Facebook, from YouTube, and also from the chat box. And after finish this question here, I would like to invite participants to raise their hands and address the question. So let us begin now, Prof. We have a question in YouTube asking by listeners. He said here that the awkward situation is that the Muslim world has been backward in the field of natural sciences and technology and hasn't tried to catch up with the level of development. What is your take on that?
You know, my first response is, why catch up? This idea of catch up is not correct. Yeah? So if the intellectual game is being designed, is being dictated by already people who are already far ahead, you can never catch up. You can never catch up. So we should use our ingenuity. What are the areas in which we have no choice but really to catch up? What are areas in which we have the choice not to catch up? We open up new grounds, new agenda, all right? Because knowledge is so wide, it's so wide. God has given every place, every geographical place, resources. If the resources are there for generations, for years and years, we don't care about the resources. Which is something wrong about our thinking. So where's gone the Islamization of knowledge? Because part of Islamization of knowledge is precisely to appreciate this, because that is the teaching of the Quran. If God has created certain countries with those material, then there must be a reason for that. There must be wisdom in that. All right? So, in other words, if you are blessed with resources like in Turkey, don't try to be country that's blessed with resources like Malaysia. All right? This, in other words, the unique resources that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. Are we ready? Otherwise, you want to say, if you are researching what the West is doing research, we want to do research on that. So, and Islamization of knowledge also means is that to have our own sense of priorities. Where are our priorities as far as knowledge is concerned? If we just teach what the Western universities are teaching, and then we follow from behind, the best, of course, is just to be their research assistant and so on. That's all. Yeah? You are not your own masters. Let us be our own masters in this field of knowledge. All right? So, in the field of natural science, what do we do in natural science? All right, including of course, medicine, including in biology. All right? So, if you are blessed with all kinds of plants in our jungles, for example, why did God give us those plants and not to other people? All right? And you think God wants to deprive us of of knowledge by having plants different from what you have in America? This is the idea. So that's why Islamization of knowledge is also one being critical. If Islamization, if in the name of Islamization of knowledge, we are still not critical, then Islamization of knowledge has failed. To be critical. So that's why, sorry, to catch up. I'm sorry, I don't like this word catch up, to catch up. We should not be catch up. Okay.
Thank you. I think it's a very good answer, Prof. There is another also some view here. It said that when you're talking about the contribution of Muslim intellectual in the past and also publication, there is also a journal named Al-Ghazali Journal of 1955 entitled Journal of Islamic Thought, in which Professor Nijatullah Siddiqui contributed regularly. So this journal also contributed to to call all modern sciences and Islamic sciences to be integrated. And Professor Khurshid and Professor Nijatullah, and with other Middle Eastern scholars, have started discussing about the need of Islamic economics. And so the question here is, the use of terminology Islamization of knowledge maybe come later, but the consciousness was presented quietly very much earlier. For example, Said Qutb, Maududi, and so on and so forth, and other scholars. What is your response to that observation?
I thought I have already said this earlier in my presentation. In other words, what is important, more important is not the terminology, but the idea, the substance of it. And I said that there have been, so before Professor Naqib Al-Antas introduced the word Islamization of knowledge, others have talked about the subject, but without using the term. And remember, I said the first generation of Muslims who encountered Greek philosophy, who encountered the Persian civilization, Indian civilization, Chinese civilization, all right? They were doing works, what easily, from our point of view, the Islamization of knowledge. But they didn't use the word Islamization because they were using, basically, I mean, they didn't use the word also, but what we're doing is to integrate the elements of knowledge taken from the other non-Muslim sources into the Islamic perspective, which is the Tawhidic perspective. All right. In terms of ideas, it means to integrate into the practice of ilmu Tawhid. Yeah, and Tawhid, and at the level of practices in conformity with the perspectives of the Sharia, and what we're not talking about is with the Maqasid Sharia. All right. So that was the broad thing. That was the broad framework in which they did their integration. Yeah. So my answer to the person who asked him, we should pay more important to ideas, more important to principles, more important to the to concepts rather than the terminology of Islamization of knowledge. We also realize, yes, I mean the term Islamization of knowledge, if not well understood, can also cause controversy, unnecessary controversy. So we want to avoid that. All right, it's not so much the term, all right, but the point is, in reality, are we integrating ideas, foreign ideas, I mean the acceptable ideas, into the Tawhidi perspective, into the perspective of the Sharia? These two. I think the rest are details, but in their broadest term, Tawhid and Sharia.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Now we have more regarding your 2 points: loss of intellectual momentum and lack of intellectual sustainability. What went wrong with the movement actually? And looking to the future, how do you see the Islamization of knowledge 10 years from now if the current trends continues?
Well, that's why ideas, in order to survive, concepts, theories, and so on, education is the most important thing. In other words, what is the most important factor of sustainability? Education. Because education is supposed to provide the continuity. I know, I realize in modern time, precisely that's why what happens is when there are changes in leadership, in the field of education, in the Ministry of Education, in the universities, in the colleges, all right? One other factors come in, which try to negate the importance of Islamization of knowledge. There's no continuity. So one of the greatest problems that we are facing in the Muslim world, not just in Malaysia, but is continuity. new leaders always like to introduce something new, throw away the old one. And that is our problem. The problem of the Ummah that we are facing. There's no continuity because psychologically, intellectually, we have been brainwashed. Tradition is not important. Tradition is not important. Tradition is not important. That is the message that enters into our mind. We must come something new, something new, something new. Whereas the correct philosophy taught by our religion Islam is there should be both continuity and change. Continuity and change. Change without tradition, without continuity, you are not going to succeed. But if we do tradition but not change, also no good. So that balance between tradition and change is the kind of thinking that should be instilled in the minds of the younger generation. I have lived long enough to see what happened. Yeah. In other words, I observed that. Yeah. Every leader, every new leader wants to do something new. No problem to do something new, but don't throw away the old, especially the useful one. I think that's my answer, Doctor.
Okay, thank you, Prof. There is another question before we go to live question. People, I mean, some critics of Islamization of knowledge say why we label something Islamic. We should be focusing on the, he said here, proposing Islamization of reasoning and the way we thinking, not labeling something Islamic, because I think we call Islamic mathematics, Islamic anthropology is going to create more problems. So what is your response to this?
Yes, of course, I agree. I mean, we should avoid excessive use of the word Islamic. That's the thing. Avoid excessive use of the word Islamic. So if our thinking is now without the word Islamic, then the thing is not true. The thing is not useful. Then we're having a difficult time. We are going a lot of problems. So that's why at one time ago, I say we must have an Islamic car. And Islamic this in Islam that is ridiculous. It's already. I mean, we are becoming absurd because obsession with the word Islamic. All right. But if we look at the larger criteria of Islamicity, then once we accept that large criteria, there's no now to go to repeat at every level must be Islamic. If it conforms to the idea of unity, which means Tawhid, then it's Islamic already. So you don't have to now in every sentence that you write, the word Islamic must appear. That is ridiculous. So I think this is important. Yeah. In other words, what is true, all right? Of course, that is the Islamic thing. So Islam means the truth. Yeah, Islam teaches truth. We should seek a truth. So if you are searching for truth, you're already doing the Islamic thing. So why is it that this kind of thing crops up in our time? I think precisely that we don't really possess the knowledge of Islam. Yeah. So we are afraid. We are afraid. If you don't use the word Islamic, then we are afraid we are not Islamic. Yeah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us aql, reason. What is the purpose of reason? Intellect. Is to think correctly. If you think correctly, you're Islamic, but you don't have to put that. Yeah. That's not the way how Islam was taught and practiced before. You know, they don't do like that. Yeah. So your questions basically, I know some people do raise that kind of question, but we should understand that whatever, yeah, in mathematics, for example, all right. we learn many things, but we never say it is Islamic or not, because it's conformed to reason. So reason has proved it. Yeah. So, but even when reason is wrong, that's it. That's the point of say you do ijtihad, you think, you exert your effort. If you got it right, yeah, you got it clear, then you earn a reward. All right. But if you in exercise of ijtihad, you also earn a merit for it. The importance of thinking, reasoning. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Now we go to live question. I would like to invite Muhammad Shazani Masri, because he wrote the question, but I don't really get actually what he want to ask. If it's possible for Shazani to ask your question to Prof directly, if you're okay with it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
certainly.
go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. I would like to ask, in terms of intellectual project or movement, where can you see exactly we begin the examining, like you said earlier, right? The principles of knowledge, okay, of Islamic. We need to do away with that. Therefore, if you want to begin that pursuit of the examining the axiomatic principles of knowledge itself, where do we begin in terms of part and parcel of the ummatic contribution to the general epistemology and metaphysics itself?
Okay, you are through the question?
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Now, I will respond to your question this way, all right? By telling you what actually happened in the field of knowledge. In any discipline, in any science, the majority of the people are practitioners of that discipline. Right? In other words, their discipline is like a house. All right, they enter into a house. They enter into a new discipline. They enter into that house. So they're happy to carry on with their activities within that discipline, to do experiments and so on. That's it. That's the majority. Yeah, by nature, the majority are doing works like that. So these people never ask whether the house is whether the foundation of the house is in the strong, is good in order or not. They never question whether the architect of the house is qualified or not. They never, many things they didn't ask. All right. All right, fine. But a minority in that profession, all right, has a different kind of mindset. I must examine also whether the foundation of our discipline is strong or not. Whether in the light of new evidence, we need to re-examine. I think that's what happened. Your question, I mean, you want to know where to begin. So you have kind of mind, all right, in other words, all right, you are not happy. You are not satisfied, just the carry on kind of doing the kind of activity. But you also want to know whether the foundational principles of that discipline are acceptable or not, particularly from the perspective of Islamic epistemology. So for people like you who are interested in that, yes, then fine. Just like I mentioned you the one I participated in Japan, the Hokkaido thing. No, we have just 7 people looking at the foundation of science, considering the nature of reality, the nature of the physical world, the nature of life, what is meant by life, and so on. So all that, those fundamental questions are normally not asked by the practitioners, ordinary practitioners. but the philosophers of that discipline, they will do. And this is where maybe it's not enough. It's not enough to settle the issue from within. It's not enough. You have to go outside your own discipline, especially those disciplines which claim to be dealing with precisely those assumptions. In other words, those assumptions are dealt with in a more detailed way, proved, verified in another discipline. That's why in Islam, we have this hierarchy of knowledge, hierarchy of the sciences. So the foundation of one science will be verified, will be proved, will be questioned in a discipline which occupies a higher status than that discipline. Like say, for example, cosmology or physics or theology. So there are other disciplines which occupy a higher place in the hierarchy of knowledge, and therefore they become, in a sense, they become qualified critics of that discipline. But in the modern world, we don't have that. We don't have that. The hierarchy has been broken down. Yeah. So the question of there is no proper, no systematized, no organized critique. Critique is just an individual thing. Yeah. So you become an individual critic. But in Islam, Islamic epistemology, it's not individual critic. It is it's kind of disciplinary critique, which we identify with a particular subject. So let's say, for example, in biology. In biology now, you have the theory of evolution, the theory of evolution. Who is there to criticize the foundations of that biology? The assumption. So we forget the assumptions made by Darwin, all right? What were the assumptions that Darwin made, all right? They forget. So people now forget about those assumptions, but we don't forget, all right? So I could criticize Darwinian evolution from the metaphysical perspective or from the perspective of cosmology. So basically, metaphysics, theology, cosmology, these are the three branches of knowledge which are able to criticize the modern economics, the modern sociology, the modern psychology, and so on, because they occupy a higher plane. They are situated on higher knowledge.
Thank you, thank you.
Of course, finally, revelation. Why? Revelation is the ultimate thing that we decide.
Thank you, Prof. I would like to invite Dr. Fatmir. He has a question here, but I think he has written the question, but I think it is better that you ask Professor yourself. It is much better because speaking is better than writing here.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Muhammad. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you very much, Prof. This is very insightful information that you have given to us. So my question is related to the element of integration. You started to discuss a bit, but I would like you to elaborate it further. As you mentioned, are we going to look at integration as a separate element, or this element, is it governed by Islamization? So which one will be the best approach that we can use while dealing with this, especially in our contemporary time or whatever it is? Huh? So thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. My own understanding of Islamization. Islamization is the broad term which encompasses integration. If you want to have meaningful integration, then, as I said earlier, there should be the broader framework, and of course that broader framework is the Tawidic perspective. Tawidic perspective is the broadest possible perspective into which we can integrate all kinds of knowledge. Now, the concept of integration itself, I've been trained in mathematics. I benefited from that. The concept of integration, you see, we have integral calculus. For example, integration is very important. When we say that we want to integrate a function, it always means we are going up to a higher degree, to a function with a higher degree. So if we integrate a second degree function, then the answer will be a third degree function. So we cannot integrate into something smaller. It has to be or to integrate something of the same size as the elements to be integrated, but always integrated into the larger perspective. All right, and we always have that in mind. Yeah, so you cannot integrate a particular ethnic group into something of the same. Yeah, that can we only say integrate into the larger society. So the I think therefore, but integration is necessary. Yeah? Integration is necessary. So in the case of Islamization of knowledge, we cannot carry out really Islamization of knowledge unless we carry out the activity of integration. All right. And but at the moment I observed that the word integration is used rather loosely, and we are silent about the perspective into which integrated.
Exactly.
So Islamic integration or Tawhidic integration, I prefer to use the word Tawhidic integration of knowledge. So if you want to integrate elements from, say, contemporary biological theory, there are many things from the theory of evolution that we can integrate into a kind of say Islamic biology. It's just all the Muslim scholars in the past, yeah, the scientists and the philosophers, when they talk about, for example, how from plants we go to the animal kingdom. Right? In other words, the plant kingdom existed on Earth before the animal kingdom. Yeah? The animal kingdom comes after the plant kingdom. Now, the plant kingdom has what they call the plant soul. So the plant soul broadens, expands, yeah, into what we call the animal soul. In other words, the animal soul has higher powers than the plant soul. But there is a transcendent element, the element that transcends the plant soul. Therefore, while the animal soul encompasses the plant soul, there's something in the animal soul that is not present in the plant soul. That is important, called the transcend. Yeah. So that's why the animal soul has greater powers, the extra powers which the plant soul don't have, and the human soul has more powers than the animal soul. So, and all this has been discussed, but the idea of integration is there. It's always, integration always means moving from the lesser to the greater. Okay, thank you. If I got that.
Barakallah fiqh, Prof. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to invite Brother Irwan, please.
Bismillah, my name is Irwan Hanish. I'm a student of Istac. So my question is, what are the common mistakes made by the younger generations? For example, science students who are interested in contributing to Islamization of science in particular and Islamization of knowledge in general. So what are the common mistakes that you have seen from your experience, and what are your suggestions to avoid them?
Well, there are several observations here. First of all, what is understood by Islamization of the natural sciences? All right. To me, the most common understanding, the most among Muslims, is to go for just look for verses in the Quran that supports the things to be integrated. All right. So there is that practice, widespread practice. We look for verses to the point that there's a tendency that there's an attempt to go for verse one verse, one fact, or something like that. Yeah. In other words, look for a verse. If you cannot look for a verse, then it's not Islamic or something like that. Let's say in science, in natural science, we have the idea of the concept of microcosm. A human being is a microcosm, meaning that it is a small universe. It is universe in nature, all right? So I've been asked by them, okay, show me, you said, Prof, you said that the idea of microcosm is Islamic. Can you tell me what is the verse in the Quran which supports it? I said, I cannot provide one verse. Yeah, I cannot go in for one verse corresponding to one fact, but I can provide you several verses together which confirm that idea. See, and therefore they say the idea of one verse, one fact. I don't think this is the right word. In Indonesia, they call this phenomena of going for looking for one verse to support one fact. They call it ayatizasi. Ayatizasi. Ayah is Arabic, Malay is ayat. So ayatizasi. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. Okay. This scientific fact. Mana ayatnya? Where's the ayat? Where's the verse? All right. This fact. No, that is a very crude understanding of Islamization. All right. And of course, the message for all, the important point is to be able to understand the message of the Quran as a whole, not piecemeal understanding. And then, what more, we understand science according to modern understanding, then this will not go further. It not go further. So I can support the concept, the Islamicity of the concept of microcosm, by looking at all the verses dealing with insan. Because different verses talk about different aspects of insan. So if you want the whole picture of insan, it's not one verse. The whole picture of insan will only be given by many verses together, which goes against their ayatizasi. All right? Yeah. Okay, that is my, that's one of the,
Thank you, it's really good.
The other one is methodology. Our young scientists, because they have been trained by scientific textbook. The modern civilization has brainwashed us, all right? Everyone was, because that was the problem faced by the West. The West faced the problem of how to prove the concept of proof, the concept of truth, and for example, yeah. So they say, well, since they cannot prove their biological, their religious beliefs according to the empirical method, then they throw away the concept of faith and so on. Yeah. So, but our younger people should understand, yeah, as taught by Islamic epistemology, different methods are needed to deal with different claims, right? So that's why we have empirical proof, we have rational proof, logical proof, we have spiritual proof, we have metaphysical proof, depending on subject. You cannot prove the existence of God by empirical, by physical means. There's no way, because God is not material. Yeah, but in the West, yeah, many people have thrown away religion, have thrown away God, because they insist on proving them by empirical means. But how come they have this idea now? Empirical means is the only thing. Yeah. Well, the West, you have they have their own problem in their history, but don't impose that belief on us. Don't impose that belief on us. We believe in plurality. We believe in methodological plurality without being anarchic. Yeah, diversity but no anarchy. Why no anarchy? Because Tawheed, that unifies all the different ways of knowing, many ways of knowing, but because ultimately all knowledge comes from God, but different ways, but knowledge reaches us in different ways, we have no problem. We have no problem with that. So, but the civilizational problem of the West transferred to us now, transferred to the Muslim, and that's our challenge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. This is my question. You know, we've been listening to you and I benefited a lot, but what is your call for action? I mean, for all of us here, for me and for everybody else here, so that we can revitalize Islamization of knowledge in our own capacity, Prof. What is your advice to us?
Action must be preceded by understanding. Action must be preceded by knowledge. This is another problem that we have, Doctor. Yeah? No, it's not problem. It's a problem of the present ummah. I don't share that belief. Yeah? Now there is a belief that everything must be action-oriented, must be a relevant action. If there's no action coming out, then that's not knowledge. I beg to differ. I beg to differ. All right? After all, we have Iman and Amal. All right? We have Ayn and Amal. We have contemplation and action. Yeah? Our intellect, God has given us intellect with two functions. One, to know the truth. One, to know the truth, which is a theoretical, all right? To know the truth. Now, whether the truth, now what sort of application it can have, that is a second question, all right? Once we understand the truth, then in the light of the truth, how should we act? So you ask me how to go for action. Well, I'm saying, and my response is, no, wait first, brother, sister, yeah? Let us first understand what the truth is, what reality is. If we understand that, then we become encouraged, we become motivated to do the action. So I think as far as Islamization of knowledge is concerned, precisely the same thing. First of all, let us understand the concept. If you already understand the concept, then let's go now action. All right. The action, what sort of action? It can be writing books, writing articles, or organizing discussion with others who have not yet accepted the concept of Islamization. So many, yeah. If you are a graduate student, for example, you may want to do research on particular topics pertaining to Islamization of knowledge, either at the conceptual theoretical level or at the practical level. But if you have not understood, yeah, then my advice is read. Now, I gave you the names of writers, scholars who have written. In other words, there is a whole body of literature on the subject of Islamization also. Just pick your choice. But I suggest, for example, have you read Islamization? Have you read Islam and Secularism of Professor Naqib Al-Antas? For example, have you read, let's say, Science and Civilization in Islam by Assoc? Yeah. So you can go on. In other words, I did not. There are many people who can help you, who can guide you to that. So balance between theory and practice, contemplation and action. Yeah, theoretical truth and practical wisdom, theoretical wisdom and practical wisdom. I think my understanding of Islamic thought and civilization is that not just one or the other, both. Yeah, both. Ilm and amal or Iman and Aman. Okay, Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof. We have 2-3 minutes more because we start around 11 plus just now. I would like to invite Professor Abdulaziz Badrous to give concluding remarks. Prof. Abdulaziz, you're welcome.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Do you hear me, Dr. Ahmed?
Yes, clearly.
Yeah, Alhamdulillah. We really want to thank Prof. Osman for this excellent lecture on the legacy of Islamization and integration of knowledge and the future. Alhamdulillah, I think he has provided a very important framework and context to look at this phenomena of Islamization. And I really thank all the scholars and researchers and the participants who are with us here. We have over 40 people in the YouTube and also 40 people here. I look at the type of the quality of the participant. Most of them are scholars and the researchers and those people who are committed to this cause of integration and Islamization and the renewal and tajdeed of the Ummah. That's what makes our gathering today very, very special. In fact, we have from many countries, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey, and many other parts of the Muslim world. What I wanted to conclude here is that when we initiated this series of lectures in Istac, the title, the name we give to this series is lecture series on futures or the futures of integration of knowledge and civilizational development. So our aim is to provide an objective critical assessment of the movement of Islamization and integration of knowledge. And from there, we sort out and emphasize the positive achievements and qualities of this phenomena, this process, and also identify the shortcomings so that we can chart the future. That's why I consider that the lecture of Prof. Osman has put the direction very clear. And I was very happy to see in his lecture how he emphasized the importance of some Muslim countries and scholars in this process of, or this idea of Islamization or project of Islamization of knowledge. And I think one interesting thing that needs more exploration and more maybe promotion among scholars, maybe in Malaysia here they know about this, but I think worldwide we need to, it's really important as he explained, the role and the contribution of Malaysia itself in this process of Islamization of knowledge. Sometimes in our Arab world, not to generalize, when we hear Islamization of knowledge or Islamization in general, we will link it to certain centers of knowledge, intellectual centers of knowledge, like we say Egypt, we say Pakistan, we say, but you come here, you see that there is a kind of an institutionalization or institutional understanding and dealing with the phenomena from the government perspective, from the society perspective, from the NGO perspective, from the university perspective, and in particular, the university, our university and institutions. So I wanted just to say that this is a series that we want to look critically to this phenomena of Islamization. And our aim is to really find out, create what he, as he mentioned, regain back that intellectual dynamism and momentum, but in a more realistic and practical way to move forward, so that we will not remain, let's say, revolving around certain things which are already done, brothers and sisters. So in this context, I'm really glad to have this series kicked off. I thank Prof. Dr. Imtiyaz, Yusuf, for initiating this as our coordinator of Islamization. I thank Prof. Osman for being the first scholar to address us on this. I thank Dr. Ahmed Al-Muhammadi for being a very nice and, as always, a very living kind of moderator. And I thank all the participants and contributors, all the scholars and our supporters in this endeavor. May Allah bless you all. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Prof. Abdul Aziz. And I also would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone. We have a very wonderful discussion in this beautiful morning. And I look forward for having more discussion in future, Prof. Osman. And we end here with Surah Al-Last and Tasbih Kafarah. Okay, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.